The brothers Wisp. The brothers Wisp, brothers Wisp. The brothers Wisp. The brothers.
You're now listening to Greg. It's the Brothers Wisp.
Hey everybody, this is Greg with the Brothers Wisp number 136. I'm coming out of the motherland, Texas. It's moist here. It's been raining like crazy, nonstop for about a week and a half. It actually killed my pickleball tournament last Sunday. So things could be better, and that's all I've got to complain about. But Nick Arolano here from Illinois has more worries. He's got a lot of does coming at him. How you doing, bud?
Doing pretty good. Things kind of settled down, and now I'm back to Zen. So we're okay.
Excellent. Well, it's good having you. Actually, hang on just a second. Let me click a couple of buttons while we're talking. Vamp, tell the people something. You got tell the people things. Come on, man. Here we go.
Okay. Like, wait, are you talking to me? Are you talking to
I'm
somebody
talking to
else?
you. I'm talking to Nick A at hey.com. All right.
Nick A at hey.com.
All right,
That's
I
me.
got you. I just had to fix a little microphone level thing over there. All right.
Ooh.
So let's get the things out of the way. We've got some new patrons. We've got Bro Turner. He is our newest patron. He actually came in a little while ago. We obviously missed last go around. Mikey had something come up last minute, and man, it just seemed like a perfect storm. Everybody had stuff to do. I think you were at a wedding. So we ended up just taking a little break. It's actually kind of nice sometimes. And you would think I would have a giant list of stuff to talk about, but I definitely took full advantage of not doing anything. So our list is a little bit smaller this go around. But I digress, and I walk back and say that we were talking about patrons. You go to patreon.com/brotherswisp. Throw us a couple of bones, and you get access to our Little Brothers Wisp Slack, where there's a lot of really good information. Bro's actually already in there doing the thing, or as I like to call him, brah. Brah. But let's get some of the sponsors out of the way. So I'm going to do the ad copy today. I'm going to give Nick a rest. I usually give him a hard time, so I'm just going to let him chillax this go around. But we are brought to today. This podcast is sponsored by our long-standing Sonar. It's a scalable, intuitive, and comprehensive ISP and operational support system. Check these guys out at Sonar.software. Thank you, Sonar. We also have QuickBit. That's KWIKBIT.com. They have their store going. So if you go to their website, you can actually order online, have that kit come to your doors. So they do indoor and outdoor 60 gigahertz kit. That's like, it's pretty much set it and forget it, right? You just put it in there. You don't have to think about it. If you do want to think about it, it's got a lot of good telemetry options. It's got a really good API. It's got deployment tools if you want to use in advance. It does solid distance and up to 8 clients per hub. So go check those guys out at quickbit.com. We also have towercoverage.com. Deep breath in. Tower Coverage is your RF propagation system to empower your network real-time data metrics, enable your coverage area, reaching your customer base, and more. The industry's best RF propagation mapping system allows website integration for customer sign-up and pre-qualification. Use this data to scientifically plan network expansion and help your WISP succeed. Get a free trial today at towercoverage.com. All right. Let's truck it.
Got through it. Rocked it out.
Yeah, man. Just get in there. You just do the thing. You just bosh it. Let's see. So, Nick Arolano, smart guy. What do we have in here?
Looks like your first item's something right up your alley.
Yeah.
Network compliance detection and alerting with Ansible. What can you tell me, Mr. Greg, about Ansible and network compliance detection and alerting? What's that all about?
I don't know, man, but I like this radio voice that you're affecting. This ASMR on the Shure mic is maybe a little bit more than I can handle. I need to pull the earbuds out, go back to the speakers. Now, network compliance detection and alerting. So that's one of the things we talk about a lot with various customers, and so I finally made a demo as far as that goes. And I had a conversation with Jimmy and asked him, because it's like a lot of times I'll know how I do stuff, like how my brain, I'll think in this linear line. This is how I would do something. But I found it's really probably best for me to take 5 minutes and ask somebody else, what are you seeing people do? Because, he's been at this game a lot. I think he's been doing the Ansible gig for about 3 years now. So he's seen a lot more than I have, right? I'm still kind of wet behind the ears as far as that stuff goes. And so he had a little bit different twist on it, and I loved it. And so I ran with it and made a demo. But the basic idea is a lot of these big enterprise companies want to make sure that there's not configuration drift on their hardware, right? They want to make sure that random tech is not logging in and making tweaks and just leaving them. Yeah. Because people would never do that. But there's also a lot of them have compliance reasons, like government mandated compliance, right? Like HIPAA compliance or, Sarbanes-Oxley or, whatever the stuff happens to be. They have to be able to prove that they're, say, security-wise, that they're adhering to all their security policies or whatnot. So they have to do that across thousands of network elements, on a regular basis. And that's just not something a normal human can do, right? So you turn to automation. And how do you do that? The way I went about it, as per Jimmy's suggestion, is you kind of have one playbook to rule them all. So the idea being the playbook you create is the playbook you use whenever you first configure a switch, right? Like I get an IP on it, I'm getting ready to put it in the network, or I've already placed it in the network and I'm going to have it do configuration on there. I run this playbook. And for my demo, I did NTP servers and SNMP community strings, right? Just some low-hanging fruit, really simple, easy ones. So I did those. And I didn't store the commands in like a Cisco format because I was doing it against Cisco switches. And I did that because I wanted to do it multi-vendor, right? So I just used a vendor agnostic data model. So I said, I created what did I do? I created a file. It's just like a plain text file that says like US NTP servers.txt or whatever it was. And for all of those devices that were in that region, I just had a variable assigned to their inventory item that said, this is your location. So it would look up and use the proper file, right? So I could theoretically run this across my infrastructure, across the entire globe, and it'll look for its regionalized stuff and utilize it. So you could also break it up by state, or you could break it up like, say theoretically think like a WISP. If it was off of a specific tower, you could say, here's this tower specific settings, that I want all these devices out there to use. And so it would pull that file, grab those settings. I just had it saved in a variable that said servers, and here they are, all ones, all twos, and to utilize those in the place. So you kind of make it vendor agnostic by having just a data model where this is what I'm storing it as, and then at runtime, you pull it, check what operating system it is, and then apply it based on that. So in this instance, I get a new switch, I put it in, I run this playbook, it'll actually grab those settings and it will apply them to the device. Bob's your uncle. But Ansible has this thing called check mode where I can run it and it will just look at the playbook that I have, right? All the automations I want to perform, and it will see what changes will I make, but it won't actually make those changes. So I had it go through, do that, and any adjustments that it needed to make, it would actually hit like this block of code at the bottom that would just say, hey, did you need to make a removal? It would just go through every device kind of one by one. And if it said yes for, say, switch 1, then it would add a line to the text file for non-compliance that said, hey, I had to remove one. And then it would jump to the section where it's like, hey, did I have to add anything? It would run through. If it found one, it would just add it to this text file that said non-compliance, in there and told you what it was. So it would run through all the various pieces. And then at the very end of that, it would create like a ticket in the ticket system based on that, and just stop, really. So the idea being you could schedule that to run, every night or every week or whatever you want it to be, and it would, create an incident that, I say incident. Most of these folks are using ITSMs, right? Like ServiceNow or something like that. And so they call, it's like a special nomenclature they use, right? Where you have problem, incident, service change, all that crap. So generally they refer to it as an incident. So it would create an incident that would show, hey, these things are non-compliant. Or you could have it create an incident that says, hey, everything was compliant. That way, whenever the auditors come through, you could just pull a report, show them this, and say, yep, see, we are actually in compliance. You can see where we were out of compliance at that one point. We repaired it. whatever it happens to be. Somebody asked me at one point, whenever I've been in the course of talking about this stuff, is like, could we just have it run and make it do the adjustment every night? Like if something was out of compliance and fix it. And I said, well, absolutely, you could do that. But what happens if you're in the middle of break fix, and you're making tweaks and changes, stuff to, you had to like cripple this, or you had to shut off a link over here to make, it's like, you don't want to undo any of that stuff. Or, if you're testing something because you're having some anomalies, you definitely don't want the system to override any of that stuff. So at least in the network space, to me, it makes a lot of sense to just generate a report on non-compliance as opposed to actually going in there. Somebody also said, hey, could we have it so that whenever we make a change on a network device, it kicks a message to like our syslog server, and then that will call the tower API, and it'll kick off this non-compliance check. I was like, yeah, absolutely, you could. But once again, what if I'm in break fix and I'm making changes? I was like, it's going to kick off a report for every freaking one of those changes you're doing. It's like, that doesn't make sense, right? It's not really manageable, because you're going to be creating a whole bunch of incidents over and over and over related to you trying to troubleshoot this stuff. And so you're just going to muddy the water. So really, to me, makes sense more to just do it on a regular scheduled interval. What are your thoughts on all that? What do you think?
I mean, you said everything that I was going to say. No, but
it's hard
I'm a
to do,
fan
for
of
sure.
I'm a fan of like nightly just audit checking. I think you got to be careful in the realm of changes, especially if you have an outage or something. And also, you can't really unless you have a whole team of programmers, you can't think of every possible failure and how you would remedy that failure. So it's going to take a lot of man hours to try to come up with all the logic to find all the possible ways you could change the configuration and fix it, or even try to work around and check. But there's certain things like there's some compliance where there's certain ports that just can't be open on your equipment. Like if you've got some PCI compliance and you want to be able to check, like, can I even hit these ports as like a simple check? There's a lot of things you can do like that are just read only, that say, hey, something's non-compliant, you should probably fix it. So there's stuff like that I think there's a lot of value in running it every night as just a safeguard or a check. And if it's not making any changes and it's just letting you know what's going on, I mean, you're going to know that it's in a change window. And then doing things in response to like syslog, it really just depends on how intrusive that's going to be. And it's kind of like a ping watchdog thing, where if you turn on ping watchdog to reboot stuff when an IP is not reachable, but you want to re-IP something and you forget about that, it's that same type of thing. So I guess it depends on how much it's going to touch and manage the equipment and how much you've invested into automation in the first place. But
yeah, it's definitely one of those things where it's a crawl, walk, run sort of scenario. And like you said, I mean, that's what we recommend. Like, I mean, that's built into our slide deck, is that the first thing you should really do when you start automating is just read-only stuff. You're going out, you're pulling information, whether it be like, let me audit all the VLANs that exist across this site or across my entire infrastructure, or, go and pull the firmware version and model, make a model of all my equipment and, create a report or something. I mean, the low-hanging fruit, that stuff you would have to do anyway, but, it kind of teaches you the automation and gets you more comfortable with it in a safe environment where you're not going to just blow everything up. So, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, don't let it completely take the wheel, but take the stuff that's kind of annoying and tedious and let it do that for you, and like guide you when there's a problem so that you can just resolve stuff faster. But yeah, you probably shouldn't jump head first and give some AI software full control of your stack.
No, but it's that whole dream that I've never seen anybody truly achieve it all the way. That's infrastructure as code, right? Where you just have a data model where you define what this router, all the configurations should look like. You define in this data model, and then the automation actually goes and makes it so. I've never seen anybody do it across their entire infrastructure. There's always some stuff where it just doesn't make sense to do that or whatever. And even in those scenarios, I'm still an advocate for just do detection, don't actually do correction automated on a schedule. Because at some point somebody's going to be trying to fix a problem and you don't want the system fighting with them while they're doing it. But it's tricky. I talk to a lot of folks in networking, and to be honest with you, most of the enterprise guys, if they are using some automation, it's generally like a proprietary tool, like Cisco's ACI or their data center network manager was that DCNM, which is kind of like the holistic product, and ACI sort of fits under that umbrella with a lot, so they're just using like proprietary tools that work on very specific pieces of equipment. Or, like in the WISP industry, you've got like CN Maestro, I guess, or the Ubiquity controller, I'm doing air quotes here, that kind of, does some automated stuff in there, right? But it's not a holistic, manage my entire environment, right? Even on the network side, let alone the server infrastructure you're maintaining, or maybe the security appliances, or, whereas Ansible, the platform itself, can actually do that across all that stuff, but it's not necessarily the easy button, right? It does take work and you have to kind of ease into it. But I like it better than custom scripting because it's so much easier for a new guy to walk in and see what's going on. Pick up and move.
Yeah, so if your goal is to replace your people, it's probably not the right direction, but
well, I mean, think about it. Think about the complicated systems you build, Nick, like as far as automation goes. Now imagine a junior guy trying to come in and start helping you do that stuff. Like, can you imagine it being easier with like an automation platform where it's like super easy, where there's tasks,
right,
versus like having to be a full-blown programmer that uses like really good practices, and I mean, it's just, to me, it's so much easier.
The back end is different from the presented front end. So the back end might be complicated, but the goal is always to make the front end for a CSR level person to use the tool.
Yeah.
So, and everything's kind of a risk assessment. Like if your equipment, if firmware involved is just copying a file over SSH and rebooting, that's probably a very low risk assessment, depending on, you need some logic to say, like, make sure to firmware the network stuff that's the furthest out and work your way in case there's compatibility problems. But there's things like that where you can mitigate and build some simple logic to do like mass scale firmware updates. So like those are the things that make sense to automate, where you could give any entry level person a really simple GUI to like do that, to save in time efficiency. But maybe when it comes to traffic engineering and stuff like that, that's a little more complicated, and there's a lot bigger risk involved in what happens if that goes wrong. I mean, at least with most automation tools, you can copy a file over SSH, and then you can verify the file integrity to make sure it didn't like half copy over. And a lot of vendors also do checks on their own to see if like the file's corrupt. So there's, once again, it's like not very risk adverse to automate something like that. People want to go a little too crazy, but it's always about what could go wrong if the tool stops working. And also, if the tool stops working, is there anybody that can still do that task manually if they have to? So I think it's a pretty fine balance there, especially when you first start, on what's worth automating and what's not.
Well, I think too, like your systems, I think what you're talking about is having creators versus users, right? Or consumers, right? So you're the creator of the automation. You have consumers that are using the front end to kind of do that. What if you bring in a junior engineer and you want him to help on the creation side, right? So that you're not, I mean, multiple respects, right? So as a business owner, you don't want these, as JJ Boyd once told me, these pillars of knowledge, where it's one person who has this amazing amount of knowledge. And if you ever lose them, right, which inevitably, right, nobody ever stays at one place forever, inevitably you're going to lose that person, so that knowledge goes with them. So for one, any business owner wants multiple people being able to kind of, do the same sort of task or whatever. But for your benefit, you can go on vacation, or you could take a couple of days off and know that, if something weird happens and they need to whip up some automation to take care of it, this junior guy could maybe assist with that or whatever. So I think, imagine a junior guy coming in, would he be able to start helping you assist in writing the automation in a month the way like you do it, where it's like custom coding? Or compare that to like Ansible, where he can look at playbooks, copy and paste, and make like simple changes. Well, I mean, even then, are you going to trust the guy after a month to be running automation?
So you could take the approach of something like Unimis, where you have an area where somebody could write a script for a vendor and like mass run it on devices. Something like that is a good middle ground between something fully custom and you have to write like complex backend code. But there's a certain point where if you can't put in a certain amount of complexity, it's almost not worth building the tool, because at the end of the day, you want to make sure that it's safe, everything's rerunnable. Any of like the major problems you would run into, you have some way to alert yourself or mitigate that problem. And when you're dealing with multiple vendors that have different like CLI parameters or API, or some devices have weird undocumented APIs, you have to have some complexity on the back end to kind of do things in a uniform way on the front end, which requires you to write things with better practices. I mean, you could always have supplemental tools, like even though I'm building an automation platform, I'm still probably going to have something like Unimis with some like pre-built scripts and stuff for other people to run in case something does happen with the main tool. You could always build in redundancy and stuff like that, but some things are just not worth pursuing if you can't put in some level of complexity. If you want something that's complete, that is, especially if you want to focus on user experience and like the user interface part of it, to make it very easy and comfortable to walk through a brand new person to start automating the network, you kind of have to put a lot of effort in to build something like that. Because like something like Unimis, a lot of people could do work with it, but if they don't know scripting, they can't really use the mass config push that well. But the backups obviously are worth it. So if you want to get to the level where an entry-level customer support person can use the tool, most of the stuff has to be kind of complicated to make it seem easy for them. But in actuality, the backend's complicated. That's hard to achieve without going past a point where like now not anyone can just work on the platform. So it's kind of like what's more important? It's like making it generally usable by everybody, including like the entry-level CSR people, or do you want to go somewhere in the middle ground, but then it's more useful to power user type people? So I guess it completely depends.
Yeah. To that, I think like Ansible, they have these things called modules, but the module is really just a chunk of Python code. Like you can look inside of Ansible and you can see all the Python that it's calling for each module. So that's all there. It's just obfuscated. So if you wanted to really do something complicated, you could write your own module, or to be honest with you, I can do most stuff in standard tasks. Here's with a caveat: it's not going to be as fast. It's not going to like when it's processing through the automation, it's never going to be as fast as if I just write a Python script. So like that's like one thing to kind of bear in mind. But it does keep it simple, and it does have some limitations. Like right out of the box, like when you look at it, you can't do like nested loops. But what you can do is I can do a loop, and then I can call a task file that basically I can have inner loops inside of that, right? So I actually have done that multiple times, and it's like one extra tiny little step, and can be annoying sometimes, but it still gets it done. And it's like I can take network guys that don't understand programming at all, and I can get them to do this stuff. You know what I mean? So it's, but also like Jimmy, I see him like he'll break into like Jinja system, like the Jinja 2. And he'll do some complicated stuff right there inside of it without having to make a module. So it's sort of like built in that crawl, walk, run right there inside the product. So crawl is you just use all of the tasks, and I try and like whenever I'm doing demos and everything I put on GitHub, pretty much all just uses like the standard modules to keep it as simple as possible. Again, the processing is not as fast. And
Well,
like
it's
if you
easier to get up and running if it's all standard modules and there's no extra stuff to install. Or,
yeah. And you don't have to understand like any of the Jinja system. Not that it's complicated, you know. I mean, it's once you start looking at it, it's really not bad. And there's a lot of good documentation out on the internet and stuff like that. Some of the documentation kind of makes me think of Mikrotik in that it shows you what it does and all the knobs you can turn, but it doesn't always tell you when you would turn said knobs. So some of that you have to do a little digging or testing to kind of figure out, you know, when would I do this, or when does it make sense to do this thing versus that thing. But it's definitely, I don't know, man. This is the crap I do all day long. So it just, you know, I can get mired down in the minutia of the things a lot very easily. But yeah, I was just really curious from somebody's perspective who does some really amazing things by custom coding versus, it's like at some point there's a balance, right? You have to figure out what that balance or what that tipping point is, right? Where I go with a standard off the shelf platform where I can get some minions in the company to help me automate versus I have this clean and beautiful piece of code, but I'm the only one that's ever going to be able to manage this thing. So it's like,
well, it completely depends too on what is the landscape of equipment you're trying to automate on. So in the WISP world, there's some devices that have no like telnet or SSH available. Some of them, like let's say you wanted to write something in a software stack that's like, I want to be able to reboot every piece of equipment that we have built in the network. So there's probably a bunch of kit that you could SSH, hopefully not telnet, but that you can SSH into, you know, run a reboot. Not a big deal. But there's some devices where you can only really programmatically do that with SNMP writes, or you have to basically make an HTTP post to a login endpoint, capture a cookie, and then hit like an undocumented endpoint that reboots the device by mimicking like the UI, because they don't have a command line available and you can't do it with SNMP. Right. So
it's just a web interface with no like OAuth 2 or token-based system that you can log in with.
Yeah. So in a lot of the WISP equipment specifically, you're limited on disk space. So they can't put a ton of functionality on there. So a lot of them are using very, very tiny web servers, and there's not a lot of extra stuff on there because they're limited on how much they can actually flash in the firmware. So there's a lot of devices you can do that with in the WISP industry where you log in, you capture the cookie, and then you use that cookie to hit like a status CGI file or whatever, and you can get all the information. You can reboot devices, but when you want to build a system that I can add any piece of kit in the network to some sort of user interface, and they can click reboot, and the backend knows exactly how to interact with that device and reboot it. And so I think as long as because if you don't take care in like writing tests or documenting the code well, if you try to do it kind of a collection of scripts, it's going to break down pretty quick when you need to start adding more devices into the network, into the system. So it depends on the complexity of how many devices you're automating against and what options are available to even integrate with them. So sometimes that might require custom code. So do you want to build an application that does like the 99%, or do you want to have one system that does like the 60% and another that does the 40%? So at some point, it's almost worth it to build your own, depending on how complex it is, obviously, and how much time you have. But there's some stuff that off-the-shelf stuff, it would be really hard to get it to do what you need it to do, depending on what you want to present to like customer support people.
Yeah. But also keep in mind, you're the only Nick Arellano I've ever met working for a WISP. So most people don't have your kind of talent in-house. So that's to me, that's one huge hurdle that most folks would face, you know, or I guess folks that would be listening to this, that's probably one big hurdle that they would be facing. You know, it's like, how do I, you know, I love the concept of that, but even then, you know, also, we're talking about a very specific application to help, like, sounds like CSRs and things. I mean, engineers too, to be able to reboot and stuff. But what happens if I also want to automate against like my server infrastructure, right? Or I want to touch some cloud resources and do some stuff out there too.
I mean, it depends how important it is. So like when in the WISP space, you've probably got thousands and thousands of devices. A lot of WISPs don't have the same scale of server infrastructure, so it's probably not as worth it. And also, you know, if you build things with good testing and you use pretty common frameworks to build the application, it's not custom proprietary code from the ground up. If you're using, you know, open source packages for parts of it, and you're using like a framework, well, there's lots of consulting agencies that they could kind of take off, even if they don't understand the WISP industry, they can understand the code and help them work on it. So it's not like it's impossible unless you write something completely proprietary and you don't use any open source tooling. That's going to be a lot harder. But you know, you could potentially automate the cloud and server infrastructure as well. But I don't know a lot of WISPs that are very heavy into that. They just kind of have a couple of things, so that probably wouldn't be worth it. And I don't know if I would want like a CSR person messing with a server or any cloud hosted instances. Maybe just like whatever it takes, like whatever your business is, and if your customers are getting bandwidth from you, they probably just need to do basic maintenance on that equipment. And we're just talking like firmware updates, doing reboots, maybe some like some graphical mapping stuff to look at like RF overlays on a map, and everything's color coded and friendly for issues to escalate to like maybe engineering or tier 2. I'm not talking about like, you know, you could just fire all your engineers and all these CSRs can run the network. It's just enough to make the 90% pretty trivial for anybody to do. So then you can just focus on working on the harder problems, but also if the tooling gives you lots and lots of context to start troubleshooting, well, then a tier 2 person can start working on the network because they've got some sort of format they're used to from a system that we would build to give them most of the information they would need to start troubleshooting the actual problem instead of just poking around from no information.
Well, how about I'm a WISP and I'm getting pretty sizable and I would like a tool like that, but you know, I don't necessarily want to try and find a nick because you're kind of a unicorn. It's you know, I don't think I've ever met anybody quite like you before.
I'm sure they're out there.
Well, no doubt that
is quiet.
That is very network savvy, but also capable of developing applications. So, I mean, are there reputable services you could go to and say, hey, you know, can you pick a framework for me, and these are the things I want to do, and build an app for me? And is that something that people commonly do? I've never tried to.
No.
Okay.
So the problem is people build networks differently. So I've talked to a lot of people who built custom automation around Sonar, like because it doesn't do a lot of stuff that they need. And the problem is people build networks differently. They're using different kit, especially when it comes to like power and DC components, like relays and stuff to do off-grid sites. Like there's so many different vendors and different equipment and just network designs and architectures, like people using, you know, VPLS to aggregate like PPPoE or maybe something simpler or something layer 2. So it would be very difficult to build a software stack that doesn't kind of force you to follow some sort of network architecture that is supplemental to the software. So most of it would have to be probably custom built based on how you run the network. But I think at some scale, you have to have some kind of automation or stuff's going to start falling apart unless you just have unlimited labor force. But that's not practical for most WISPs. So I think you need some automation. And the earlier you can adopt automation, the easier it is for you to ramp your business up. But to have an off-the-shelf solution that handles the 99% use case is just too difficult because people have, or even just with acquisitions, like if you have a network platform that runs your network and you want to acquire another WISP, like how long would it take you to forklift that network into the architecture that supplements your automation system? So it's like, you know, in a perfect world, it'd be great, but it is pretty difficult, and it's hard to find software developers who are also network engineers.
Yeah.
To understand, like, this is how this thing works. This is how I need you to interact with it. Like a lot of WISPs who have nothing also probably don't know best practices for routing protocols to explain to a software developer, like how I need you to automate this, you know?
Well, so that is, I even say, how long have you been at your new gig?
Probably like, I don't even know, this like 8 months or something.
All right, and you
I
are
don't know.
very savvy. You're very dedicated. You have all those skills, and you are still busting your ass trying to get this thing in line, right? So it's not any small. I mean, it's no small feat, right?
Right.
Yeah.
You have to have a foundation that is automation friendly to start really like taking off with that. So even stupid things like how you name devices is kind of important, because there's a ton of stuff you can do with regular expression matching to like in NetXMS, for example. I use like naming convention to figure out what type of device it is and to like sort the devices into the containers I have in NetXMS. And being able to, or another common thing that I see, like we have these Tycon relays that have like 4 voltage inputs to just read voltage, and then like 4 relays on them that you can power cycle equipment if they're DC powered. So like making sure that every single site that has a Tycon, voltage 1 is always battery, and voltage 2 is always like the alternative power. Just getting stuff so that the automation system can assume that voltage input 1 is always the battery bank is really hard when maybe you've deployed a ton of that kit out there, but nobody took any effort or thought about like, maybe I should wire these exactly the same everywhere. And a lot of those devices, you can't just with SNMP find the labels that are in the web interface. It's just V1, 2, 3, and 4. So there's no way without doing some kind of gross screen scraping to try to regular expression match. Does that say something like battery? So you kind of have to like think, if I want to do automation, there's a lot of things that you can do just in documentation and naming things to make things more supplemental to automation. Otherwise, it's going to be really difficult. But the more that you can standardize your normal processes, the way that you document and label things, the easier it is for you in software to, build configuration templates and do some auto discovery and intelligence. Because like how you name stuff, like what's a backhaul pretty easily. What's an access point just by the name, and so everything else becomes a lot simpler. So getting people to do things from a cookie cutter type of standpoint is very complicated on its own, without even bringing automation in.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, best laid plans. Like even at some of my properties, I'll have everything labeled and done up exactly right, and then the cablers will go out there and do something completely different, and it's like, well, I need to get this site up now, and so I'll adjust all my stuff so it it doesn't fit what I port 1 doesn't go to IDF1 and port 2 doesn't go to IDF2. It's just sort of a random mismatch of stuff. That's always fun. But yeah, I totally get it. Yeah, standardization is absolutely critical for a lot of automation stuff. Like I wrote a script, or I wrote some automation the other day. Have you ever heard of CyberArk?
I saw one of your blog posts about CyberArk at gregsoul.com.
Yeah, so they're like these security guys that really have kind of the market, not necessarily cornered, but a good portion of it, especially in enterprise, around password security. So they do this CyberArk. It used to be called AIM. Now it's called Central Credential Provider. Central Credential Providers is generally what they refer to it as. But it's a system whereby you have a server or a cluster of servers that maintains all of your passwords vaulted, like very secure, and your automation can connect into the password vault and request the password at runtime based on like your credentials. Yes, I'm allowed to, and all that stuff. And it'll pull it and it'll use it. But they have this scheduling piece that sits in the middle. It's sitting there and it's watching everything that happens. And so it has the ability that, after X number of uses, it'll go and it'll change the password inside the system for a server. Well, a lot of these people, what they do is, imagine you have 100 servers, or, devices, right? These could be network elements. These could be, it could be anything, right? It could security appliances, firewalls, load balancers. It could be anything. So you've got 100 of these devices in there. Every time you connect in and use the password, as soon as you disconnect, it reaches out to that device and it changes the password on it, and it changes the password on the secure vault server. And every device in your infrastructure has a completely different password. Isn't that like bonkers? And so
that's kind of crazy.
It's like, how do you connect to that in your automation? So I wrote a playbook that within the play will comb through every device, and what it does is it looks at the host name of the device you're connecting to. It connects to the central credential provider server, and it pulls the password based on the host name. Like, that's how I did the designation, right? So if you willy-nilly name stuff or there was no consistency,
Right.
it's like that whole system breaks down, right? So you have to have like, in a database, you have to have a primary key, right? You got to have some piece of information that you're keying on. And like you said, a system name is an amazing way to do that. Not only, like you were talking about, because then if you do complex naming, then you can say, because we always named our devices like a site designation, and then, or like a geographic designation, then a site designation, and then what it was, and then it's like its individual like ID inside, right? So you could pluck out any one of those pieces that you're talking about and utilize that for additional processing in some specific way. So it makes a lot of sense. But do you think a lot of WISP just kind of go into it, naming stuff, whatever? Like, I cringe when I see people name servers like Star Trek captains and stuff like that. It's like, what are you doing with your life?
Yeah. I mean, I've looked at a lot of WISP networks, and there's like, people don't really think about it. But then it becomes a problem when you're like, okay, now I want to start moving into automation. And then you're like, well, everything I've been doing for however many years now has not been automation friendly. So like, people will label, or they'll name a backhaul, like just whatever the local site of the site is. And it'll just be like this site backhaul, or maybe the remote site backhaul. So, if you're going to do something that's like Discord monitoring or whatever chat system you have, or if you want to do some automation against it, it's like, well, you only have like one piece of the information there. So you kind of have to do extra work to maybe look at some neighbor table information, or do some like IP address subnet analysis on it's just like, why don't you just do yourself a favor and come up with some convention that makes the initial like discovery of that equipment in your automation system simpler. So for a lot of backhauls, I use like the abbreviation of like the site name to the other site name, and then like usually the models in there, and then the last part will say like BHM or BHS for the master or slave. So then in XMS, eventually I want to get this filtered and set up. So if I have a backhaul link in NetXMS, well, there's certain things like signal to noise that I don't want double notifications for the master and the slave. So I just have to do a quick check. If the device is the backhaul master, here's a set of things to monitor. And on the slave, don't worry about it, because I have that on the transmitter side, or the master side. So naming things is pretty useful, because most of these devices, at least in the WISP space, if you hit just the generic OID for system description, you have like a good chunk of information on what the model is, like what the location is, what the role is in the organization. I don't know, like, so naming things is a very easy way to do a good chunk of automation, and then you have to write less code and custom stuff for everything else. And as long as you are adamant on the way that you name stuff, it's a lot more automation friendly. And at this point, I have NetXMS. Every time there's a configuration pull, it just rewrites the device name in NetXMS to whatever the host name is on the device, so that things look the same between in the device and in NetXMS. But most people that I've looked at their networks that are not like very large and successful WISPs have taken no effort. There's nothing on there, which is unfortunate, because you don't think about it until you need automation. And then once you need the automation, you're like, oh crap, I shot myself in the foot.
Now I gotta go back and fix all of this
to set myself up for success.
Yeah, well, but it's like, you don't know what you don't know, right? Well, you're starting out, exactly. So it's one of those things. It's nice to talk to somebody like you up front. I just remembered when I started at Fibertown, all the servers were named after transformers. It was like, how was I supposed? So the monitoring server was called Perceptor. Apparently, he's like a transformer that would, I don't know, turn into like a telescope or something. So it's like, how am I supposed to know this stuff, man? It's like ridiculous. So I renamed it like Web Server 1. It's like, guess what that thing does? This thing is the web server. Oh, monitoring server 1? Guess what that does? It's the monitoring server.
Yeah. Well, and if you got to scale stuff up, it's like, oh crap, now you got to think of more transformers. It's like, I got to spin up another load balancer or another web application server or a database. It's like, what's another transformer?
Well, then it turns into like this philosophical discussion. It's like, well, this transformer could kind of do the, it's like, so it eats more time than it's worth. It's ridiculous.
Exactly.
All right, man. Well, I had a note in here for anybody. So, I mean, it's been a little minute since we've talked, but anybody that went to the last Wispamerica to get your thoughts, and you were there for a couple of days, right? How many days were you there?
I was there like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I think. 3 days.
All right. Well, did you have a good time? Was it interesting? Dallas sucks.
Yeah,
by the
it was
way,
interesting.
So there's that.
Yeah, a lot of people. It's a controversial subject, but there was almost no mask wearing.
Okay.
They had to announce a few times on the stage that everyone needs to wear their mask unless they're drinking or eating. That's a lot different than where I'm at. That area specifically was interesting. That's all I'm going to say about that. There was decent vendor presence. Some of the talks were pretty decent. There's a lot of stuff that was kind of interesting to me. There's more involvement with like Google, for example. They've got some new software and stuff coming out to help with CBRS and also some link planning stuff. So it was kind of cool to see some representation there, even though the whole panel for Google was over like a Zoom call. And I had to have somebody from the crowd go up there and like man the laptop because none of the staff was there for the session. So we were talking to people like from Google and trying to ask questions, and they could barely see us through the webcam on the laptop. But I think it's cool that there's some big companies coming into like WISPA to do some demonstration on products and get to know some people. There's a lot more resources now allocated towards WISPs, especially in the software space. So that's pretty exciting to me.
That's interesting. Do you was there anything that any like scuttlebutt people were talking about? I'm curious about like I don't know, like Starlink or any of that stuff. Was there just anything people were talking about out there?
Oh yeah, there was panels for how to compete with Starlink.
Really? Rock and roll.
It was a pretty big topic. I mean, that and like Terragraph stuff was pretty big as far as conversations. Lots of stuff about 6 gigahertz and getting gigabit to the home over RF, even at longer distances. So that was pretty much the theme, is getting higher speeds, new technology coming on the horizon, things like Terragraph, and how to not be scared of Starlink.
Right. Keep buying equipment, keep throwing that stuff out there.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid. All right, well, rock and roll. So it was a positive experience. How was traveling? I'm sure that was the first time you'd really traveled since.
It was weird. First time being on a plane in a long time. And they almost kicked somebody off for not wearing a mask.
Golly.
Like, oh man, what a trip.
Zero tolerance, I assume.
Yeah, they were just going to remove him. And then I think they had him sit like in the very front area where like the crew usually is, to make sure they would keep their mask on.
Damn.
Which I've never seen that before. I was like, man.
They put him in timeout.
Exactly, for the whole flight. And they had to explain to him why they had to keep their mask on and why it's not a choice on the airline.
Rock and roll.
Yeah.
Wacky.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, I think I mean it's a ways off, but I think Red Hat's gonna have us like Q3 of this year start traveling again. So for me it'll be traveling for the first time, right? Because I actually got hired in right as COVID was really coming in strong and we started quarantining and stuff. So I guess that'll be interesting by then.
Usually when they hire you, said they get like your measurements and they fit you for a hat and stuff. They fly you out. So are they gonna like bring in all the new recruits and do a meet and greet with people, or it's just go off to do some sales?
I honestly don't know. I know whenever you first get hired, traditionally what they do is they would ship you up to North Carolina to the headquarters, and you do your first week there. And then they supposedly, I've been told, there's like this special room that you go in that has the red hats in there, and you get your red hat. Well, mine came in a FedEx box, so I'm assuming that I don't get to partake, or maybe I should say I don't have to partake, because if I did all that intro stuff again, it's like, dude, I've been here for over a year now. I get it. I've drank the Kool-Aid. You know, it's like I don't, you know, I know my way around and stuff. So I think at some point I'll probably get to go up there just to check it out or whatever for a day or two. But yeah, I'm not going to have to do the whatever thing. But, you know, somebody I know flew last week, and they said it really wasn't bad. They said wearing the mask was kind of uncomfortable at first, but then like once they were on the plane, they heard like some people coughing around, and they're like, "Oh, thank God I've got a mask on." He was like, "I'm pretty sure from now on I'm just going to travel. Like when I get in the plane, I'm just going to put on a mask." Yeah, I was thinking because that makes sense. It seems like every time I travel, either just before I fly back or once I get back, like I get a cold, you know, and so it's you know, trapped in a tube full of people. You know, if I keep a mask on and I don't pick up the con crud or whatever, I think I'm for that. People are disgusting animals. This is what I'm getting at.
Don't want to offend anybody. People are real heated about that.
I just don't want their germs.
That's
fine.
Right. I don't want their germs either.
Oh man. All right. Well, I don't know. I don't think Mikrotik's announced any mums or when is Wispapalooza? Is that usually like October-ish, somewhere in there?
I'm not sure. I've never actually been to one. I got to go to at least one.
The one in Vegas? I'm sure I'll go this year. So we can all get together and have a good time. Miller took me to a Korean barbecue last time we were there. I think we ate at like 11 at night. Man, it was delicious.
It's the best time for Korean barbecue.
I think any time is the best time for Korean barbecue. It's pretty awesome. All right, let's talk about some of this Mikrotik stuff. Oh, well, I guess just as an update note, I was asking a little while back about Arista. They have a vEOS, you know, their just their virtual EOS system. So they call their stuff EOS. Cisco calls their stuff iOS. Arista is basically Cisco iOS with just the tiniest of tweaks. Their configurations are almost identical. But I was looking for it for a lab because I wanted to do some demonstration. Well, that compliance demo actually. And so I was like looking around. It's like, how do I get a hold of it? And then I figured out if you just create a free guest account, they have vEOS lab editions for like every revision of their software. You could just grab it and put it in your virtual environment and play with it. I was like, this is brilliant. Why doesn't everybody do this? Bunch of ding dongs. So yeah, so if you want to play with the Arista stuff, you want to lab some stuff, just go grab the vEOS for free. It's really simple. That's all I'm gonna say about that.
Yeah, now is a great time for labbing. I mean, when I first started virtualizing to learn for certifications, you pretty much had Mikrotik and you had like some Cisco images, but there was almost zero for layer 2. There was no like actual virtual environment that simulated everything layer 2 as far as like VLANs and everything else you would want to do, that like actual spanning tree, like stuff that actually worked in a virtual environment. You just had to use like the GNS3 dumb switch with like basic VLAN stuff. But now, you know, you got Arista images. Cisco has a bunch of layer 2 appliances and layer 3 appliances. If you get Cisco Viral, you get access to all the images. But I think last time I looked at it, they don't let you download it anymore. You have to go through the whole in-browser Viral thing. But I think you can still get the older images. So now there's tons of options to virtualize and play around. And most of the major vendors now are making it available for people to like lab and do certifications because, you know, competition's getting a lot better. People are formalizing their training a lot better. So getting this into people's hands to play around with the CLI is probably doing a lot of good for their sales, I'm sure.
I still have this giant rack of lab equipment, and I think I'm ready. I'm pretty much ready to get rid of it all. I think I use like 4 switches. That's about it. That's about all I use out of there anymore is like 4 switches. And I think I'm going to take those and just install them in the Red Hat lab and, and put my, all the power. Now I'll use my power controller. I'll take it. I'll put it up there. And then I'll just turn them on when I want to use them and then shut them off. Because I never write mem on anything. Like I never save the memory.
Yeah.
So just to undo everything, I just, you know, turn it off and then turn it back on. And then I have playbooks for any demo that I want to show that I run first and it'll pre-configure it for whatever it is I want to like have in the demo. And then it'll just do whatever. So yeah, I should just get rid of that crap and put it up there because I get tired of hearing it buzz over my shoulder when I'm like doing a demo.
Noise and the power draw.
Yeah.
When at this point you could go online, get like a refurbished like Dell R610 or something. Like you can get like a generation behind stuff for a couple $100 and it's quieter.
Yeah.
And you can virtualize it all now. So
the only thing I use those switches, well, I mean, I use them, I incorporate them in a lot of demos, but the real reason I have them is to show iOS firmware updates on actual physical kit. Right. So that's something you don't really like emulate in the virtual stuff. So that's the only reason I really like hang on to them is for that. But if I just stuck them over in the lab, I would never have to hear them again. I wouldn't have to think about it. And I literally, this giant rack of stuff that I've had forever. Like I've got some 7200s. I got 3 of those. I've got like 4 2621s. I've got like 5 or 6 catalyst switches. I'll probably keep my Mikrotik stuff though, because I still need to lab that here every now and then. But that stuff's silent, right?
Right.
Yeah. But that's it. And that whole giant 42U rack will go away. Because that's most of a 42U rack. Yeah, that's so weird. It feels, kind of wrong. It kind of hurts my soul a little bit to say that. But I think the time has come. I'm actually going to make a note to myself to migrate that stuff to the lab and just be done with it. Oh, well. Such is life. All right, let's talk about a little bit of the Mikrotik hardware stuff. Huh?
Listen, you don't have to buy hardware anymore. Get these free images. Start building your career.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Like if I was getting started today, yeah, I don't know that I would buy any hardware.
It's definitely not as much of a gatekeeping situation anymore. Like you don't like, at least before with Cisco, you'd have to buy like a couple different versions of routers and make sure they have the correct software licensing to test some of the stuff you need for labs. And you need to have switches and serial interfaces. But now it's like you can get tons of images and throw in a 50 node network on GNS3 or even G, cable it all up, blow it all up. So, and it's free.
Yeah, good times. All right, let's see. So there has been some stuff on Mikrotik, so we've got to talk about a little bit of hardware. One thing I guess that's frivolous is the Mikrotik Home app that they finally put out, which I think, isn't that like an extension of the no, because the existing app they have is like Winbox, right? That's not, is that different than the Mikrotik Home app or no?
I think so. I think the Mikrotik Home app is, it's more like, I haven't used it myself. I want to, but I think it's more of onboarding for customers, and it doesn't have like the full like toolkit and settings that the Mikrotik app has.
Gotcha.
Which I think is good because it kind of opens it up more a little bit for residential users, especially with things like kid control. If they can kind of build all that stuff into a really nice user-friendly interface where all the setup is like a step through a wizard or something, I think that's a good distinction.
It definitely looked, from the YouTube video that we have a link to, it looked like the Fisher-Price version, right? Where you just log in and it's big, pretty knobs, and there's only like 4 of them, and it sets up all the features you actually need, and then you're done. And I guess if you're savvy enough to need something beyond that, well, I don't know. I haven't played with it, but it looks like something where you could give, like when my nephew or my cousin calls me and says, what router should I get? Instead of just telling them to go and get something simple from Best Buy or Amazon, I can say, you know what? Actually, you could use this Mikrotik and use this home app, and Bob's your uncle. You'll be good. Because I know a lot of people do, I guess, tech support for their family members, but dude, I don't want to do that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few people that I help them put a WAP on the side of the house to shoot Wi-Fi to the garage. Because they're like, I want Wi-Fi. I'm like, just put this out here and I'll Capsman configure it or something. And I put a little SSTP tunnel to manage it, but then my dad like told my aunt, and she's like, I want that for my garage. Like, I don't want to like do this for everybody. But having some kind of app would be pretty nice to get more people, because just for the price, people go out and they spend like $200 some plus on like these Nighthawks with 8 antennas, when you can kind of get the same Wi-Fi performance with a Mikrotik for a fraction of the cost. So making them have a higher market share in the United States. Hopefully they'll listen to more of the features that we want as well. If it helps them kind of blow up the revenue,
Yeah,
great.
I thought that was a tremendous idea. I'm glad they're finally going that direction. So it definitely makes sense for sure. And hopefully they'll just keep building upon that. So what else is new? A couple of different things. They also introduced MLAG, and
So excited.
I think Andrew Thrift, on the side of his fighter jet, finally, like stamped another kill on there, because I know he's been pushing for this one for a long time. So they are adding at least initial support for MLAG in version 7. Golf clap from Nick.
So
over
exciting. I think I have crisp on. You probably can't hear this.
I can't.
Yeah, it filters it out.
That's cool. But they even have a wiki article on it now, so it's legit. It's official. It's in there. I don't know anybody that's tested it yet, but I'm sure somebody will eventually.
I'm glad they went the MLAG route over just stacking. It's going to be pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like that would open them up to a lot more functionality, right? Because stacking, you have to have generally like proprietary interfaces. Yeah, like that. At least that's what I think, like a stack port. But I guess some people just stack through like optical interfaces on the side or whatever. But MLAG's standards based, right? At least the one they're trying to adopt. Is that right?
I think when I looked at it, it's actually not standards based. I could be wrong on that, but one of the big differences is stacking. You have a master for the control plane, and almost every switch stack I've tried, as soon as the master dies, the whole stack is dead. It stops forwarding traffic. Some of them, if you reboot the kit, it'll elect a new master, and then you're back on track. But I've also done a lot of consulting for customers who were sold these big FiberStor switch stacks. That it's useless because they were sold on redundancy. But when the master goes down, nothing. But with MLAG, there's a lot of synchronization that happens across the chassis, and if one just blows up, traffic still goes through. I've been looking at a bunch of different options to use that because layer 2 redundancy is pretty difficult, at least in the Mikrotik space, to get like true redundancy. I mean, with routing, you've got VRRP, but looking at different vendors, I was looking at Arista for a while and some gray market gear to see some stuff that's cost effective. Usually you have to go into like data center grade switches, which usually have a lot more power requirements just to get something like MLAG. So the fact that Mikrotik is making this available on CRS3 is going to be killer. Yeah,
that's pretty baller. Again, it's a version 7 feature, so if you're on 6, you're not going to see it. Well, I mean, I don't know, maybe crazier things are happening. I suppose they could backport it, but it doesn't seem like that's something that they would end up doing. And I'm sure that since this is the initial phase, it's getting a lot of tweaking and tuning as it gets ready for prime time. So that's it's pretty cool. It would be something to watch at least.
And with a grain of salt, I am more willing to run beta software on a switch than a router, just for MLAG. Like I'm very tempted to test like the CRS3 10 gig switches, as long as the VLANs work okay and MLAG works okay. Hopefully it'll be less problematic than routing issues. So I'm contemplating putting some beta switches out there to be able to use them.
Well,
I'll see though.
I did read the article, at least I skimmed it, and it said that it's required to be running STP or RSTP, so it's interfacing with the spanning tree protocol in some form or fashion. So I might wait a little while to see that calm down before, work out all the kinks, any bugs, before I put that into production. But, they're not going to find the bugs unless you guys test. So more power to you folks, just not me.
Deploy it and scale and automate on beta software.
Yeah, go for it. Oh, forget it. We're doing it live. There you are. All right. So we talked about the MLAG. So also, we've been burned by this before. Mikrotik inserting little April Fool's jokes in their code. But this one doesn't feel like an April Fool's joke. Maybe. I don't know. I'm just going to put that caveat out there. But somebody was looking at the RouterOS 7.1 Beta 6, and there was a new model number in there, and it is CRS 520, right? So that's 500 series, a whole series that's completely unannounced, but it's 4XS, 16XQ, so that would equate to 4 25 gig ports plus 16 100 gig ports. So that's a spicy meatball, which I thought was interesting because I don't think Mikrotik has any other kit with 25 gig or 100 gig ports, right?
I don't think there's a single thing with 100 gig ports.
So
I'm so interested to see
how do
what
you
the
connect,
price tag's going to be.
how do you connect your other Mikrotik stuff to this switch? I'm curious.
Well, it's going to come out with a 100 gigabit high density switch. I'm so curious on what the price point's going to be. This is going to be crazy.
Yeah, well, I mean, who are they targeting with this? So I know the likes of Mike, he's kicking some 100 gig stuff. I think Miller might be playing in that space. We've talked to another WISP, but I bet Latvian Telecom could use some 100 gig switches.
They probably could.
It seems plausible, right?
I'm excited. I mean, bringing one of the cheapest that I've seen, at least, you know, I don't know everything about every vendor, but one of the cheapest options for an MLAG switch that, like, in a long time, and now getting into 100 gigabit capacity ports, I think this is going to be a huge boost for them in market share. I mean, if you got to go 100 gigabit, Mikrotik's got an option that makes the choice a lot simpler, assuming there's good stability.
100 gig ports with MLAG, right? That sounds like a core switched infrastructure to me.
That sounds like carrier.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that sounds like some heavy hitting right there for sure.
Yeah.
So no doubt about it. Somebody was saying that maybe one of those 100 gig interfaces, you could have like some kind of muxing cable that would break it into, you know, like 10 gigabits or something like that.
Oh, like they did with the other switches where the 40 gig splits into 4 10 gig interfaces.
Yeah, something like that. So you could use it as like not just, you know, 100 gig termination, but also kind of an aggregation switch if you wanted to. That would be kind of cool.
Yeah, combined with MLAG.
Yeah.
You have this crazy backbone stack of 100 gig.
Because I could see the switch mounted, and then right above it or below it, you've got an LIU that you just, you know, you break out, you know, the 100 gig interface, and then you have it slot into 10 ports, and then, you know, another one slot into 10 more ports. So you do some pretty good aggregation with that. I mean, I'm using some Nexus 3064s, and so that's like 48 ports of 10 gig. But this thing, you know, if you had 16 ports at 100 gig that you could break into 10 apiece, that's 160 10 gig ports theoretically, if that was, you know, something it could do. So it's pretty damn good density in what I'm assuming is a 1U package.
Yeah.
Give me a price speculation.
I have no idea, honestly. I mean, they don't really have anything that's even ballpark close to this, and I know that the optics in 100 gig are pretty expensive. I have no clue what this is going to cost. Probably, I don't know, 5-6 grand. No clue.
Yeah. It's like I don't have any kind of yardstick to measure this against. Like I can't even begin to know what kind of price tag you would stick on something like that. But even at 5 or 6 grand, that really doesn't sound that bad to me.
100 gigabit.
Yeah.
Like if it can actually route that, that's going to be.
Oh, you wanted to
crazy.
route it too. I thought you just wanted to switch it.
Out both.
You want your cake and eat it too. I get it.
See what they can do. They're gonna, you know, depending what they do, it's gonna disrupt the market potentially, and hopefully it'll push other vendors to also start competing in that type of space. Hopefully, we all get huge benefits out of this.
For sure. well, I mean, theoretically, like the 300 stuff, they're starting to unlock the hardware routing capabilities of those things. And, you know, they can be pretty powerful. So this thing, you know, whatever ASICs are going to be associated with that many 100 gig ports are probably going to be pretty beefy, huh?
Find out hopefully soon. But it's like, is this going to be a version 7 release where like the timeline is going to be up in the air, and hopefully we'll get both at the same time? I mean, I'm assuming these have to be running version 7.
Yeah, I don't know. I would think so, right? But I mean, I don't know.
It's just speculation.
Yeah. And again, this might just be a joke that they inserted inside of because they have done this before. So I don't know. There's no point going too far down the rabbit hole, but it's interesting. Very interesting nonetheless. What else is on here that you're interested in? Or do you have anything else that you're interested in?
The route filtering thing's kind of important.
All right. So that was one that John Osmond picked up. He was saying that Hurricane Electric builds their filters for their peers like once a day. I guess it's on a schedule. And so they look at the routes coming from you. I guess the routes you're sending to them upstream, and then they'll rebuild their filters based on that. And I guess maybe as the assets probably as well. I'm not sure, but he certainly
they will verify with RADB or like Aaron's database. So not only do you have to be advertising them, and that is like down to the prefix as well, like the net mask and everything. Mm-hmm. So if you've got some failover where you need to advertise maybe the individual /24s and some /23s or 22s, depending on how you're handling failover with other upstreams, you kind of have to advertise all of that at once. But also they will take what your advertisements are and they will verify it against one of the routing registries to build their filter. And of course you can call in and ask them to rerun the filter. So like you could always have them do it, but you got to be careful if you forget to advertise a chunk of IP space, specifically the prefix you start to advertise after it's built. You're not going to get traffic out there.
Yeah, he said like one of his. I think the context was one of his customers stopped sending him a route for like 30 minutes, like their subnet for maybe they were doing maintenance or something, and that happened to be the window that HE rebuilt their filters. So they rebuilt it without that customer prefix. Well, everything came up. And he could look in Hurricane Electric's looking glass, but since they were down during the filter rebuild, they weren't actually transmitting that out to anybody else they were connected to. So he said that was a really fun one to troubleshoot. And as you said, he, once he called in, he got him to just, rebuild the filter and everything was fine. But I'm sure he wasted a lot of time trying to figure that one out.
Yeah, we just turned up Hurricane Electric at 2 of our edge sites and went through this. So it was the first time actually setting up a route database to get everything all out there for them to verify. I think more people should do this though, because they need to have some sort of good mechanism for having a centralized database of who's allowed to advertise what, to be able to match against advertisements, just to make the internet a better place. And I think, was it Tommy? He posted something about Facebook advocating for some sort of OAuth-based system for API for this type of like routing registry to encourage more secure systems to list what IP space you're allowed to advertise to make this process probably a little bit better. So it's kind of interesting, but it's hard for smaller people that are just kind of starting their ISP and they're starting to peer, like having to learn all that stuff and how to submit their IP address information. And I don't know, but people have done bad things with the internet as of recently,
and they'll continue to do it. So no big deal.
So this type of stuff will help prevent a lot of that.
Yeah, so that's a fun one. I was thinking, I bet you could do the same thing via some simple automations. I don't think that would be, because, I don't know. I think of stuff and then I think, oh, well, they're doing it automated. I wonder if I could make a system that would do it automated as well. And then I think, but I'm not in the telco vertical. I'm just in commercial. So it's like nobody would be impressed. None of my customers, if I did that. The telco guys would be like, oh, that's baller. But I don't sell to the telco
RADB,
people.
They all have APIs to see people's route information, and you could build filters and stuff based on that. It's just making sure that the integrity of those routing databases are secure and that there's some way to verify, like you're allowed to advertise that. At least with Aaron, they have to SWIP all your IPs to even be able to submit it. Like when they first did their routing database, you could just put any subnet you want in there and save it. But now, if it's not like SWIP to you from the carrier, like you can't even type it in; it'll just reject it.
That's good.
RADB, not so much. You can put whatever you want in there, basically. Until someone complains, of course, but mistakes can happen.
Yeah, mistakes were made. Everybody's fat-fingered something from time to time. Hopefully you're copying and pasting proper information instead. But yeah, I was thinking like it would be cool to, have some automations that just look at, all the customers that are connected to you and then look up their AS, their assets and stuff, look up their filters, do the comparison like they're doing, and then, update the filter list for them. Of course, I wouldn't do that in Mikrotik because BGP filters are somewhat tricky and buggy right now in version 6. So if you get it working, probably don't touch them ever unless you have a problem. Then drag them around and then put them back in their proper order, and then they'll start working again. So it's probably better not to do that. But you could do it against, Cisco, Arista, Cisco or Arista or, Juniper or something like that. That would probably be an interesting use case.
Or version 7 beta. Just kidding.
Buzzing. All right, man. Well, do you have anything else top of mind?
Not really, man. I'm just happy the network's happy right now. That's all I can ask for.
Well, they say if mama's not happy, nobody's happy. So for you, it's if the network's not happy, nobody's happy.
Right. That's exactly what it is.
You know what? I find the only anxiety that exists in my life anymore is from the networks I maintain that are like my networks. That's the only thing that causes me problems.
Because you know what could go wrong and what has gone wrong.
Oh, well, it only gives me anxiety while it's broken, of course.
Oh, okay. Well, that's probably a good thing. If it didn't give you anxiety, then you'd probably be a bad engineer.
Yeah, I had some brownouts a little while back.
I'll fix it at some point. Let me just take a quick look. Yeah. No urgency. It's going to be fine.
Well, I mean, then that would make me any other carrier, I guess. But
oh, that's true.
Yeah, I had some brownouts, and I lost some of my FiberStore optics. Well, I didn't lose them. They just started flapping. So I had to have folks go out there and do some replacement stuff. So now I'm going to put in backup links for all of those so that I can just fail over on my own if I need to. But yeah, it's, it's funny because it just, I don't know, man. It gives me anxiety when that stuff's busted. And I'm like, and I hate telling people, all right, well, I've got stuff on order. It's going to be here tomorrow morning at 10. And then, it's like, I don't want to, it's like, I hate that. And the guy was like, thanks for really, like the apartment manager was like, thanks for putting so much attention on this. I was like, dude, I have trouble sleeping when this stuff is broke. It's like, this is not about me trying to do good customer service. I mean, I guess it ultimately boils down to that, but it's like, for my own sanity, I need this fixed.
That's why I'm so excited about MLAG because especially like core switches or like anything that's switch centric, like it's always a pain. Like you need to firmware update stuff, especially when there's bugs or for security exploits, but then you got to take the network down. So being able to build stuff, especially layer 2 resilient, like to have a whole switch blow out and you still have traffic forwarding, it's going to be a huge piece of mind saver, especially when the entire network that I manage for the day job is across the country. So being able to kind of overlay these systems, that's not going to cost an arm and a leg and isn't going to require racks and racks of extra batteries to power like a Cisco or an Arista. It's going to be pretty exciting. I've had a lot of issues with FiberStore optic. Well, not just FiberStore optics. I've had issues with Cisco optics. I don't remember the other brand, but there's a few that we had that are industrial for some of the big radios that are like $70 a module that just flake out. So being able to use more like LACP and, if it starts to have some problems, being able to just disable a port, but all the traffic is still flowing pretty well. It's a huge piece of mind saver.
For sure, man. Yeah, you were talking about being able to do upgrades. I've personally seen before, and I've heard horror stories of like Cisco stacks where you try and do upgrades and it just shits the bed. It's the best, probably the kindest way of putting it, and just wreaks havoc on that sort of thing. So, yeah.
You should be able to, because the whole management plane and everything is separated. Like you should be able to temporarily disable the interfaces on one switch, do the firmware update, maybe light them back up, then switch the other one off. Like you could do it pretty comfortably, assuming everything works well. And that would be kind of incredible, especially because as long as you've got really good layer 2 redundancy, it's more compelling to start doing more VRRP things, to start to because VRRP has always been available and it works really well, but then some of it's like, but then everything's going to come down to the core switch, so is it worth the complexity? But now that there's a really good option for layer 2 redundancy, people can start to build those things in a cost-effective way, and it's going to be cheap enough you could buy it for HomeKit and test it and trust it instead of buying gray market kit and putting it out there. So anything you can do to make sure that if stuff dies, you're not completely dead in the water, it's going to be pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's so funny how Mikrotik sort of changed my view on buying equipment. Like Mikrotik's the only stuff that I've ever been able to buy brand new.
Yeah.
Everything
especially
else
software updates.
Always been great.
Tons of Cisco kit just get nuked with a message plastered on them.
Yes.
I know a couple people personally. It's like, Cisco does what Cisco does, but when you buy gray market and you can't afford the support, being able to buy brand new and have lifetime updates is huge, regardless of the power draw savings and whatever else. Getting up-to-date software and CVE patches is massive. We just saw this go wrong very recently.
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote a little playbook to fix that for your stuff, and I put it on the WISP Talk thread on Facebook, and I think Matt Hoppus said something like, but these commands don't work on all of the equipment, so if you put it across all of your stuff, you'd have problems. And I just replied and said, if the command doesn't exist on the device, it just won't do anything. It'll move on to the next device, so you'll be all right. So
he's like, rats, you foiled me.
You got me again. Yeah. Well, that was the only response I had, so that's the only one I could talk about. But yeah, it's nice. But you know what, Cisco kit, when that stuff works, it just works, and it will.
Well, if you secured
operate.
If you secured the management plane in the first place, it wouldn't have happened.
That's what I'm saying. It's like the Cisco kit I put out there. It only has an IP on the management VLAN. That's like the only way to connect to it. So pretty locked down. Even though it's older, and I get like the newest versions of firmware I can for those older pieces of kit, they're still pretty locked down. And I've used Cisco stuff forever, and you can harden it.
I believe it.
I just can't afford it. And you know what? For like my application, it just doesn't do what I need it to. Whereas the Mikrotik stuff does. So it's the right tool for the job.
It's mostly just power. I mean, there's a lot of sites that are just solar and battery. I can't put a Cisco out there. It's just no way.
Oh, you got not with that attitude.
Man, it's so much power. I could put a fully redundant Mikrotik kit for less power draw than like one power supply of a Cisco switch, probably.
Yeah, that older stuff especially is very power hungry. Not much you can do about it.
Yep.
The newer stuff, I'm sure, is a lot more efficient. I just, who can afford it?
Right. Especially now when it's like, years ago you could get just a generic support contract and just get the firmware repository, but now it's like you have to get a support contract for that SKU, and every other switch or router or like whatever, you have to have a support contract for that model to get the firmware for that model, which is kind of insane. Even some Cisco partners I talk to, they don't just have access to all the firmware.
Yeah, the licensing has gotten very clever where you can't, you just have the same model of switch and get the firmware and then load it on all of them. Now it's like individually licensed per device, especially like features. Like it might come with base, but if you want a feature, it's like individual per piece of kit that you're licensing. So how dare they get clever and realize that their hardware just lasts forever and try and find a way to monetize that. So
I mean, I guess they can milk it while they can, but once these smaller companies, quote unquote, start pumping out these awesome competitive products, hopefully they will follow suit, and it's going to be better for consumers.
Yeah, it'll be a win all the way around. I really don't see a world where Cisco can if Mikrotik gets as reliable as a piece of Cisco kit, I mean, you could run over a Cisco switch in your car and it would still, continue to operate perfectly. As soon as Mikrotik can get bulletproof, then
yeah, even if between the MLAG and VRRP you can get similar nines, even if there is some kind of failure rate, if for less money you can build redundancy and use less power, which means smaller UPS systems. It's like, okay, you could buy the one piece of kit, or I could buy multiples and have them as like an active failover and whatever. It's cheaper. Who cares? Like the other one will take over. I'll go swap it. Easy to configure. No problem.
Yeah, I'm on board. Pretty much all the networks I build nowadays are Mikrotik, unless something doesn't fit right or work right. Then I'll put a piece of Cisco kit in there to fill that gap. So I'm like, in my network, I'm like 99% Mikrotik. There's one Cisco switch that acts as the core, and that's it. And a bunch of fiber store optics and fiber. I guess I don't buy anything name brand if I can help it. Although Mikrotik's name brand, what am I talking about? I was just talking
name
about
brand
the
now.
optics.
Yeah.
Although I guess fiber store is like considered mainline, because virtually everybody I know buys from them now.
I mean, and most of the optics, unless they're like special custom and have like heat sinks for industrial temperatures, they're all from the same factories. I mean, they're not making their own optics; they're just OEMing some optics. So,
such is life. I thought Fiber Store bought like an optic manufacturing plant or something.
I mean, it could be, but last time when I looked, because I was looking around at a bunch of different options, a lot of the ones I was looking at came from the same warehouses in China. So yeah, save $1 here and buy a bunch of extra spares. Haven't been majorly bit by it, especially with some bonding and stuff.
That's what I used to do with my Cisco kit. I would buy gray market, and I would just always have a spare on the shelf of like everything, because it's so much cheaper when you buy the gray market. Such is life. All right, man. We're at an hour and a half. You want to stick a fork in it?
Yeah.
All right, bud.
That I do.
If people out on the internet want to get a hold of you, Nick, talented programmer, creative network engineer, how would you have them do that?
You can email me nick.a@hey.com, or ideally join us in the Little Brothers Wisp Slack group. There's lots of awesome people here, people smarter than me. So yeah, join the community. It's a lot of fun.
Oh yeah. Name one person that's smarter than you.
You.
Nice try. Let's see if that's on the board. Sorry, it's not. Incorrect answer. Good try. All right, let's see if the Sowell family can steal. If you guys want to find me, I'm Greg at gregsowell.com. That's an easy way to email me. I'm regularly blogging on gregsowell.com again. You can add me on LinkedIn, do all that good stuff. But if you want to get a hold of me quickly, probably the easiest way is to connect to me via the Slack chat, right? I answer my DMs pretty quickly. I don't look at it nearly as much on the weekends. I've been trying to, do that work-life balance thing where I sort of turn off a little bit on the weekends when I can, but I'm usually pretty responsive on there. But then again, I don't really necessarily need to be anymore, because there's so many smart, there's only one Nick A. I've already stated that, but there's so many talented engineers on there that you're going to get a good answer from a lot of interesting perspectives. But you go to patreon.com/brotherswisp, and then you can support the podcast, and get access to that Slack. I guess if you guys have any questions or comments, I know we have an interesting demo coming up pretty soon. Somebody's going to be playing with some Terragraph kit. They're going to be putting it through its paces and then doing a review. And then there's also another software routing vendor that I think we're going to talk to very soon that's supposedly making headway they've apparently been doing it in the telco market for a while, and now they're pushing into the WISP industry. So we'll be talking to them very soon as well. So any other products or interesting things you guys want to hear us talk about, or talk to some folks, or anything like that, please let us know. Questions, comments. Other than that, thank you, Nick, and we'll see you guys next time. Let me click stop on all the things. I gotta come over here, and I click stop, and then I come here, and I click stop.
Some good comedy given. If you missed the show already, don't worry, you're forgiven.